the 5,000-year-old secret behind Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, for simple words that have captivated children for generations. But what if I told you that the story of Jack and the Beanstalk isn't just a fairy tale? What if this beloved children's story contains secrets that are over 5,000 years old? What if Jack's magical journey up a giant beanstalk connects us to our most ancient ancestors? Today, we're going to uncover one of folklore's best-kept secrets. We'll journey back through millennia, across continents and civilizations, to discover how a simple tale about a boy, some magic beans, and a giant has roots that stretch deeper than any beanstalk could ever grow. Before we dive into ancient history, let's revisit the story we all know. Jack, a poor boy living with his mother, trades their only cow for a handful of magic beans. His mother, furious at what seems like a terrible bargain, throws the beans out the window. Overnight, they grow into an enormous beanstalk reaching into the clouds. Jack climbs this miraculous plant and discovers a giant's castle in the sky. There, he encounters a fearsome giant who owns a goose that lays golden eggs, bags of gold, and a magical harp. Through wit and courage, Jack steals these treasures, chopping down the beanstalk to prevent the giant from following him to the ground. It's a story of courage triumphing over brute force, cleverness defeating size, and poverty transformed into wealth. But this tale we know today is just the tip of an ancient iceberg. The version of Jack and the Beanstalk that most of us know was first published in English in 1807 by Benjamin Tabart. But scholars have discovered that this story is far, far older than the 19th century. To understand just how ancient this tale truly is, we need to meet Dr. Jemshid Tehrani, an anthropologist at Durham University who conducted groundbreaking research in 2016. Using phylogenetic analysis, the same method scientists used to trace evolutionary relationships, Dr. Tehrani traced fairy tales back through time like following branches of an enormous family tree. What he discovered was remarkable. The story pattern that we recognize as Jack and the Beanstalk, specifically cataloged by folklorists as the boy who stole ogre's treasure, can be traced back approximately 5,000 years to the Bronze Age. But how is this possible? How can a story survive for 5 millennia without books, without writing, without any of our modern methods of preservation? The answer lies in the incredible power of oral tradition. For thousands of years, before literacy was common, stories were the books of humanity. They were memorized, shared around fires, passed from grandparent to grandchild, and carried by travelers across vast distances. These weren't just entertainment. They were vessels carrying the wisdom, values, and experiences of entire civilizations. To understand how Jack's story spread across the world, we need to go back to a people who lived around 5,000 years ago on the steppes of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. These were the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a nomadic people who would become the ancestors of most Europeans and many Asians. These ancient peoples didn't just give us languages, they gave us stories. As they migrated across continents over thousands of years, they carried their tales with them. Like seeds scattered by the wind, these stories took root in new lands, adapted to new cultures, but retained their essential core. The basic pattern that folklorists call ATU 328, the boy who stole ogre's treasure, appears in dozens of cultures across Europe, Asia, and beyond. In each version, we find the same fundamental elements. A hero, usually young and poor, a magical means of reaching another world, a beanstalk, a tree, a ladder, and a confrontation with a giant or ogre from whom treasure is stolen. In ancient Greece, we find the story of Odysseus and the Cyclops Polyphemus, a clever hero defeating a giant through wit rather than strength. The parallels are unmistakable. Both Jack and Odysseus use intelligence to overcome physically superior opponents, both steal valuable items, and both must make a dramatic escape. But the connections go even deeper. Archaeological evidence suggests that Bronze Age peoples across Europe and Asia shared remarkably similar mythological concepts about giants, sky worlds, and magical plants that could bridge the earthly and divine realms. The giant in Jack's story isn't just a random monster. It represents one of humanity's oldest and most universal fears and fascinations. Giants appear in virtually every ancient culture on Earth, from the Titans of Greek mythology to the Jotuns of Norse legend, from the Nephilim of Hebrew scripture to the Rakshasa of Hindu tradition. But why giants? Why did our ancestors across the globe independently develop stories about enormous, powerful beings? Some scholars believe these stories originated from actual encounters with megafauna, enormous animals that lived alongside early humans. Imagine trying to explain the bones of a mammoth or a giant cave bear to someone who had never seen such creatures. The leap to stories of giant humanoid beings isn't so far-fetched. Others suggest that giants represent the forces of nature itself, earthquakes, storms, volcanic eruptions, given humanoid form so that people could better understand and cope with these overwhelming powers. In the context of Jack and the Beanstalk, the giant represents more than just a physical threat. It embodies the established order, the powerful elite who hoard wealth while common people struggle. Jack's victory isn't just personal. It's a revolutionary act, a story that gave hope to the powerless throughout history. The beanstalk itself carries deep symbolic meaning. In many ancient cultures, certain plants and trees were seen as axis mundi connections between the earthly realm and the divine. The world tree appears in Norse mythology as Yggdrasil, in Hindu tradition as the Ashvatha tree, and in many shamanic traditions as the pathway spirits used to travel between worlds. The fact that Jack's beanstalk grows overnight speaks to ancient beliefs about the magical properties of certain plants. Archaeological evidence shows that many Bronze Age cultures had sophisticated knowledge of plant cultivation and believed strongly in the spiritual properties of certain crops, particularly beans, which were often associated with death, rebirth, and transformation. The treasures that Jack steals aren't random objects. Each carries profound symbolic weight that has resonated across cultures for millennia. The golden eggs represent fertility and renewal. Eggs have been symbols of life and rebirth since the dawn of human civilization. The fact that Jack's goose lays golden eggs connects to ancient beliefs about the magical properties of gold, not just as a precious metal, but as a symbol of the sun, of divine power, and of incorruptible purity. The bags of gold represent accumulated wealth and power. But in the context of the story, they also represent the redistribution of resources from the powerful to the powerless. This theme appears in folklore across cultures, from Robin Hood in English tradition to similar stories in ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian literature. The magical harp is perhaps the most intriguing treasure. Music has always been associated with divine power and magical influence. In ancient traditions, certain instruments were believed to have the power to enchant, to heal, to communicate with spirits, and even to control the elements. The harp that plays by itself represents mastery over the supernatural, the ultimate treasure for any hero. But there's another layer to these treasures. Some scholars suggest they represent the three things that Bronze Age peoples valued most: livestock, represented by the egg-laying goose, precious metals, the gold, and cultural knowledge, the musical harp. Jack's theft of these items represents the acquisition of everything needed to build a civilization. As the centuries passed, Jack's story adapted to fit different cultures and time periods. In medieval Europe, the giant became associated with the old pagan gods being overthrown by Christian values. Jack represented the new faith triumphing over ancient, dangerous powers. During the Renaissance, the story took on economic undertones. Jack became a symbol of the emerging merchant class, someone willing to take risks, make unconventional trades, and challenge established power structures for financial gain. By the time the Industrial Revolution arrived, Jack's story resonated with themes of social mobility and the possibility that clever individuals could rise above their birth circumstances. The magic beans became a metaphor for investment and speculation. Sometimes risky ventures pay off spectacularly. But throughout all these transformations, the core elements remained unchanged. The poor hero, the magical ascent, the giant's treasure, and the triumph of wit over strength. These elements have survived because they speak to fundamental human experiences and desires that transcend any single culture or time period. In some versions of the story from different cultures, Jack is a girl. In others, the giant is a demon or a dragon. Sometimes the magical plant is a tree, sometimes a ladder, sometimes a rope. But the pattern remains consistent, suggesting that we're looking at one of humanity's archetypal stories, a narrative so fundamental to human nature that it emerges independently in culture after culture. Recent archaeological discoveries have provided fascinating new insights into the ancient origins of stories like Jack and the Beanstalk. Excavations of Bronze Age settlements across Europe have revealed evidence of sophisticated agricultural practices, including the cultivation of plants that were clearly considered sacred or magical. At sites in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists have found Bronze Age temples with elaborate carvings depicting giant humanoid figures and enormous plant motifs. Some scholars believe these may be among the earliest visual representations of the mythological concepts that would eventually evolve into stories like Jack and the Beanstalk. DNA analysis of ancient plant remains has shown that Bronze Age peoples were far more advanced in selective breeding and plant manipulation than previously thought. They were creating new varieties of crops and may have genuinely believed that certain plant combinations had magical properties. Perhaps most intriguingly, recent studies of Indo-European linguistics have identified specific words and phrases related to giants, magical plants, and treasure stealing that appear to have been shared across ancient cultures. This suggests that not only the stories themselves, but even specific ways of telling them, have survived for thousands of years. So the next time you hear the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, remember that you're not just listening to a children's tale. You're connecting with a narrative tradition that stretches back to the very dawn of civilization. You're hearing echoes of stories told around Bronze Age fires, carried by migrating peoples across continents, adapted by countless generations to speak to their hopes, fears, and dreams. Jack's Beanstalk doesn't just reach into the clouds. It reaches back through time, connecting us to our ancient ancestors who first dared to imagine that we could triumph over strength, that courage could overcome overwhelming odds, and that sometimes, if you're brave enough to climb high enough, you might just find that the treasures you seek have been waiting for you all along. The 5,000-year-old secret behind Jack and the Beanstalk isn't just that it's ancient. It's that it reveals something timeless about human nature itself. We are all, in our own ways, Jack. We all face giants. We all seek treasures, and we all need to believe that sometimes magic beans really do grow into something extraordinary.